Welcome, everyone, to this week's Blitz.js meetup. Excuse me. Should be a fun day today. And I will start out with a short update. We are working on upgrading React Query to version v3, and that is being worked on by Tundera. That's his GitHub username. I'm not sure your first name. Sorry if you're listening, but he's done really good work on that. It's been a lot of work. He's been sticking with it, so super thankful for that. So that should be coming within a week probably. And then Simon Knott, one of our maintainers, is working on a new feature for routes. So it allows you to import routes from Blitz, and it's a Prisma style code generation. And so that routes object will have all of your routes defined on it. And so you can do link href equals routes dot sign up page, routes dot homepage, routes dot dashboard, and it's named by whatever you name that page component. So it's it's pretty slick. And then it's fully typed. So it's statically typed. It works with dynamic routes where you have multiple like dynamic parameters, and you can use it to like automatically generate menus, for example. So that's going to be really cool. So hats off to Simon for that. And then I am still working somewhat slowly on the Next.js fork integration. This past couple of weeks I've been slammed with client work, so I've been kind of slow on the Blitz progress. But I do have the fork integrated in the repo. The Next.js build is working. I have it integrated with Blitz, and so Blitz apps are running using the build of our Next.js fork. So very close to being able to start shipping our forked version. So it doesn't change anything about the implementation. It's still using our custom compiler and then our fork, but then we'll be able to start moving piece by piece, moving some of those things into the fork and slowly getting rid of our current compiler setup. So still in progress, and that's going good. All right, Roshan is up, and he's going to give a lightning talk. Let me make you a co-host, and then you should be able to unmute and share your screen.
All right.
Take it away.
Yeah, you should be able to hear me now.
Yep.
All right. Let me share my screen then.
Just a second. So I am.
Okay.
I'm turning on chat. So it looks like all the bad actors left. So chat is enabled as long as you behave.
All right.
All right. Go ahead, Roshan.
Okay. Let me start the Prezi. Okay, yeah, so I'm excited. This is the first Blitz app I made. Called it Word Antakshari. It's basically a game that my friends and I used to play when we were small. So yeah, it's a quick summary. I'm going to talk about, I guess, my previous experience and just coding, programming in general. I'll demo the app itself a little bit, and then I'll talk about the challenges that sort of came about when I was going through the creation, any solutions and suggestions that I have. And yeah, finally, what's next for me. So yeah, I've been doing, I guess, full stack dev for, I guess, 7 months before this. I found Blitz, well, I guess my previous stack was a C# ASP.NET Core backend with a React frontend. And I wasn't really satisfied with, I guess, a lot of the issues that came up when I was trying to do front-end work, like especially form validation, where I had like duplicate logic between, a React front-end JavaScript and a C# backend. So I found Blitz and I was like, you know what, let's give this a go. And I'd say, like, based on the small table I made, it went really well, especially because I learned a whole bunch about TypeScript, Node, and Prisma. So yeah, let's do like a quick demo. Okay, so logged in already. Are you guys able to see the app screen? All right, cool. Let's do a public match and 15 seconds. Cool. And I don't know if this part will work because I need a private window. Are you able to see the private window? I don't know if that works though.
We're just seeing one window.
Okay, I think I'll just have to play against myself because this session sort of persists in normal windows. So yeah, I basically start the session, assume there's someone else over here, and then you can just start making plays. So this is every Pokemon, and you're only allowed to play valid words from that list. So you can play any one of the 977, but the next person must play a word that starts with you because Pikachu ends with you. So, and then you can do it. And if it's not on the list, you get an error. So it's essentially a multiplayer game where you play words from a list, and there's a few rules to how that can work. So I have like things like timing out, things like total time for the entire game and so on. So yeah, I guess that's like a brief demo of the application itself. So going back here, the first challenge was, I guess, I wanted to make both logged in users and just guest users be able to play with any combination of each other, guests and guests, users and users, users and guests. And so the Blitz, the set public data function, along with the ability to get those on both the server and the client was useful here. I actually added a separate guest ID, GUID field there, and I didn't, that might not have been the best way to go about it. I could have probably just had like user ID, changed that to a GUID and had like a guest name that would indicate if it was a guest or not. But I would say this was one of, I guess, uh, this was a pretty good Blitz feature I could just use immediately to solve this user and guests issue. But yeah, there could be, while writing this, I thought we could maybe add a tutorial on changing the user ID to a GUI ID, but I don't think that's too necessary because I looked again at the code and I think the type is inferred from what's in the database. So depending on if it's just like that single change in Prisma from like number to string for the user ID, we might not need it. Maybe just have like a note to people to say, hey, this is how, if you wanted to change to like GUIDs, this is how we do it. So that was like the first challenge I had in this app. Yeah, the next one was data sync because we want all of our clients to have the same game state that the server has. So my first thought was WebSockets, but the issue there was we needed to do a custom server for right now, and that wasn't, I guess, TypeScript supported, and we didn't have, I guess, Webpack and Babel. There's like some stuff there, but Brandon suggested another library, like it's called Room Service, I think. But I wanted to build my own because I had like no experience with Blitz, and I thought making something of that complexity would probably be a good learning experience. So I went about doing that, and the hooks with the use query set to like a certain refetch interval actually worked really well. I think there's a lot of caching that the database does, which actually helps with this because a lot of the events are the same except for when you add one. So yeah, this has been working really well for me, and I'm going to continue to use it until it starts breaking. So I'm excited to see where, I guess, things go from here in terms of like support for stuff like this. I know, Brandon, there was like a tweet where you mentioned a use subscription hook. I don't know if I know the exact PR for that, so that might be something I could, I guess, get afterward. Yeah, next up was background tasks, and I needed some way to do things like do a countdown timer but server authoritatively. So I didn't want to wait for like a client to tell me, hey, I'm done with my turn. I've timed out myself. Instead, I want the server to be able to do that process and say, okay, it's been 15 seconds since they last, or since the last person, put in their words. So right now your turn is over. And I decided to go with the recommended Quirrell API, which I think Simon not made. It's a pretty good API. And I didn't end up hosting serverless, so I don't really, I guess, get the maximum benefits out of it. But it's not that big of a deal because the code, I can probably see how to easily create my own thing if needed, and then just call that API endpoint on my own and would do that same sort of, I guess, functionality. So yeah, I was thinking, for stuff like this, I thought maybe if I had like a really intensive job, I could split it up into batches that would run. I could like add that to the queue and do pretty cool things with it. So yeah, background tasks are like pretty well supported. I know Quirrell is also like for Next.js as well, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, next up, hosting was. I know there was like a couple like issues going with Vercel and serverless, so I didn't really like venture out that far as yet. Instead, just went with like a normal server. Would be like a DigitalOcean. They call them droplets, and then a DigitalOcean Postgres database as well. The database has a nice GUI firewall where you can add all of the machines or IP addresses that you want to be able to connect to the database with, which is pretty good. But the server itself had like its own, UFW firewalls and stuff, so that got taken care of. I have a Nginx reverse proxy, which allows me to do multiple web pages on the single machine. It's like saves, I guess, saves me from buying multiple ones basically. And finally, I guess the last security measure was just non-root, like non-login users that would run the blitz start command. I'm sorry, I will run the blitz start command. So yeah, that's just like the hosting part of it. Pretty traditional, but again, it works. So yeah, and I guess lastly, there were some assorted development challenges that I just sort of put into one slide here. And most of these have been resolved. The Windows permissions issues was a pretty big one, but right now I don't run into any of it. So kudos to Brandon and everyone who made the pull request to solve it. I think the NPM issues, there is still one. I might like have to go back and test it again to see if it's fixed. But I've switched to Yarn though, so that isn't as big of an issue right now. Typescript issues, I actually had no TypeScript experience, and there weren't really any issues that I wasn't able to, I guess, look into or like get help from the Discord. And yeah, like to anyone here, if you, I guess, run into stuff and you're stuck, you can like just open up something in the Discord if you don't know about that thing already. But yeah, everyone's been pretty helpful here. Form validation, this is what like I really like about Blitz, because that was the issue with C# and the JavaScript thing. Right now you write one Zod schema and that lets you do both front-end and back-end validation really well. And the error handling there is also great because you can throw an error on your mutation and that gets caught in your front-end, and then you can define your own errors and throw your own custom ones, and those could have elements inside of them, and you can use super JSON, register them, and then handle them really well. Let's say you had like a message to display within one of these, or like you had like an array of things to display, you could reference that in a type safe manner. So yeah, that was also pretty good. I guess what's next for this project would be, I'm going to try to integrate Stripe to it, see if I can get maybe, I'm going to do like a free version for every user where they get like 1,000 free words and like 3 free lists to use. And then after that, you could pay for like more words. I guess you could get around that by creating a multiple accounts or something, but let's not go into that. I'm going to finish up unit testing. I've started on that and things seem pretty good so far. I'm going to do integration testing and try to do rate limiting as well. And then I'm going to work on like a new official app. So yeah, yeah, that was the talk. Thank you all for like listening. Yeah, checking it out.
Very cool. Thank you, Roshan. So now I'm allowing you to unmute yourself. So if you have questions for Roshan, now is your time, your chance.
Yeah, so quick question. You mentioned room service for the subscriptions and not going with that in the end and just use the refetch interval. What was the primary reason for that? Just purely because you wanted to try, or?
Yeah, basically I already started on it, and I think I was like halfway done with it, and I was like, let me just see this through and see what experience I get from that. So if I do something similar in the future, I might try to use room service and see how well that works compared to like what I've done. So yep.
Any other questions?
I can ask what I asked in the chat as well. You mentioned as well you wanted to do rate limiting on the API. Is that something you have an idea on how you want to approach, or have you not looked into that yet?
Yeah, I've only so I haven't done it before, so I had to research how it's done in Node. I don't know if that's something I can apply immediately to Blitz. I might need to do a little more research on how I can map those, I guess, controls.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you, Roshan. Next up, we get to hear from Tim Booker, who is the co-founder of MrGamble.com, which, as far as I know, is the largest Blitz application in production, at least in terms of traffic. And they converted from Next.js to Blitz. So I'm excited to see what Tim has for us. Tim, I'm going to make you co-host. Tim, you are now co-host. You should be able to unmute yourself and turn on video and screen.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Let's see if it's working. Hey. Can you hear me? Everything's okay?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, excellent, great. I just need to work out how Zoom works. Just need to get this screen shared.
The screen, yeah, hit the green button and then.
Cool. Is that looking decent? I don't hear anyone else. So is my connection okay? Because I'm hearing only a really patchy. I've had around a similar business. I was working in a similar business at the time. And about the idea of really making it more about a comparison engine, which is actually useful to people and not just what tends to be a lot of the case and a lot of the time is this kind of just useless landing pages. And now it's more about providing an actual application, which actually does something. So at the time we started off and we looked at it and we were like, okay, well, Gatsby seems to be getting talked about quite a lot. And Contentful seemed to be getting a decent amount of talk as something that's, there was a good way to address just having some data and having it hosted without having to build a CMS. So we started off with that, but it didn't take too long before we started hitting problems with that. So for example, with Gatsby, when you start hitting around a few thousand pages, which are super data oriented, so looking at things which are based off data queries, which have some data attached to them, the GraphQL schema style of things works quite well, except for when you want to reform that data into exact shapes which really match that page shape to minimize footprints. So we said, okay, well, about a year later, we thought, okay, well, maybe what we must need to do is go to Next. And Contentful itself was already starting to hit some quite expensive, quite rapidly data requirements. Contentful was just another headless CMS thing. So that hit those requirements. And we're like, okay, well, Sanity seems okay. It's just another headless CMS. They've got a different pricing schema. The main difference we looked at there was that they were enabling lots of localizations and for no extra cost, and also that they could, so Contentful had a weird thing of each data item you have, it can have a maximum of 24 fields, something like this. Maybe it's changed now, but that definitely was the case then. And as you can imagine, most data entries can have more than 24 fields. And it didn't limit that. So we're like, okay, great, this must be the one, because we don't want to build a CMS yet because, well, it's not really our specialty. It's not really, we don't really understand our own data yet. We're just making some data and making some pages based on it. And I think it was about 6 months into this where we hit a bunch of limitations from Sanity around similar type of attribute problems. So you can only have 4,000 different attributes, which they define in a fairly unique way. Yeah, I won't go into too much detail on it, but it made things quite challenging to go past a certain size. And then with Next.js itself, because of the structure of all these pages we were creating, like at the moment, as you can see, something like about 20,000 different pages. We're obviously querying the Sanity database quite a lot. And the way in which you query these headless CMSs tends to be more along the lines of using their DSL, which connects to an API, which is kind of okay if you, right. Yeah, but I think these are common problems people are going to hit with Next.js in any framework if you're doing lots and lots of data API querying in order to build your pages. Because obviously when you start hitting lots of pages and it moves outside of a blog or an application that's really a focused user application and becomes more of a website or like a way of expressing many, many pages of content, you end up with this page generation stuff. And with Next.js particularly, in order to work out what page ID you're on, you kind of have to query at least once for every page, even if list of potential names for games, for something else. So you end up with quite heavy processes. And if you're looking at a couple of 100 milliseconds per response, it adds up really quickly for this type of stuff. And if you want to have that static page rendering, you have to do it. So there needs to be a really efficient way to query data is something I've come up with. I've decided on this. It's not a new problem, but at least on the page generation, it becomes quite important if you want to have regular publishers. And so yeah, on the bright side though, with doing the static generation, for example, like I said, we've got about 20K pages being built, but we have decently high traffic. It's not nothing insane, but it's all more than manageable on a sort of $100 DigitalOcean box and without any stress with the database and the website application hosted itself on there. And prior to using Blitz, we had the application hosted on pretty much just directly on a CDN. So good side is that pretty much you've got nearly unlimited scaling in terms of front-end site. And then as you start querying these headless CMSs, you get problems, which is why I've looked for a solution to that. Thus looking at Blitz and thinking, okay, well, I want to have this way to hit my own database, and I want to do this all within the same project because it's a big project, but it's not that big. You know, I don't need to have 5 different servers with all sorts of crazy things going on to it. It's pretty singular problem oriented. It's about just showing some data and making it render on a page. It shouldn't be that hard. And for me, that's actually what Blitz pretty much enabled to do. It just gave me a simple way to write some database queries, thankfully back in SQL again when I needed to, and Prisma when it was more simple stuff, like using their query language. And then let me just do that. And of course, the queries came together pretty quickly. And responses, that is, were pretty rapid because it's a simple database request from a database that's maybe only, I don't know, 500,000 rows or something like this. So this is something I've got that was really great from it. And it's that there's not that much happening that Blitz does. All it does is really connect up some things in a nice way that doesn't really get in your way. And it solved pretty much all of these previous problems we were having. The other thing we wanted is, of course, like mentioned here at the bottom, is the idea of we wanted to control our CMS workflow more tightly. So as we got bigger and bigger and we got much more content being added, because like I say, within the space of a couple of years, we started from some 5-page blog to quite a decent sized team of content writers and everything, that having these near enough vanilla CMSs wasn't going to work anymore. Okay, well, we need to actually develop our own CMS for this. Cool. So how do we do it? Going from Next Insanity to Blitz. So Next is obviously still the same thing. So for most of the actual React code, all of these front-end level codes, part segments, they near enough stayed the same. So obviously when I was writing the Next Insanity requesting application, this was really more about, you had all your front-end code, and I had kind of a back-end layer of it where I had, I don't know, query for names of something, .js, and to move it over to Blitz, pretty much just copied that into a queries folder and then swapped out the contents of there to be a database query, and it just worked. There wasn't really that much configuration required. Some poking of things, some slightly different opinions around how things worked, but nothing I remember. Therefore, it cannot have been that stressful to do. It just seemed relatively straightforward, and every minor annoyance you had on the way was kind of okay, fair enough, you need that information if you're going to be connecting to, if you're going to be working on a live server, or if you're going to be on a server for these sort of queries. So the way we approached it, because obviously we had some problem with it, is in that we had the problem with the query speed, but we didn't want to fix the problem of the CMS immediately. So right now we were actually in kind of a midpoint. We haven't replaced the sanity part of it. What we've done is, as step one of the seeding of the build, we populate a database using the seeds.ts and basically an export file from Sanity into a database on every single build, but at least via a single export query that's just 1 2-second, 3-second request and then pummeled into the database. And at that point, we've got this database that gets built in a Docker container. And inside this Docker container, also we launch a server. So we have effectively these Docker containers with all of the data connecting to a database. And we have a couple of instances of those running, because there's a few problems with having it immediately switching over to CMS. Is you've got to deal with the publishing process, because if you're having a database connecting to statically generated pages, but also your database connects to live queries. So say, for example, when I look at this page here, which is some casinos listing, it's good because this initial first request is statically rendered. But of course, if the database accepts changes on the database you want to make, you need to have a whole publishing process around which ones are live, which ones are not, which didn't need to be managed too much before. Whereas now, of course, if I had added a new casino beginning with this, say, then the problem would be that if the database had this, but the statically rendered page didn't, I'd need to somehow resolve this via fallback pages of Next or something else. So for now, I've decided just to avoid that whole problem and just have these databases created at build time. So it gets most of the benefits of using Blitz, in that you've got all this query approach, you've got this speed around things, but without having to deal with the immediate problem of having that whole publishing process tied into data changing. For this. Okay, I've kind of quickly covered that. Yeah, it's kind of covered all these things in the last couple of statements. So yeah, I've got a few problems we have, which I've still not really come up with a good solution for. And I feel like I mentioned before, but I think that maybe I can mention again, because why not? The things I'm wishing Blitz did, and we have a few problems with that. Obviously, with this site being managed many locales, and within each locale there's a different page structure. So if, say, for example, I go to Estonian. Why not? This contact page or this like game provider, the Mango2Jad, and these type of pages and all these type of connections off this are all localized, whereas Next itself doesn't really manage localized URLs in a nice way via dynamic things. We've made our own custom solution for it, but it's a bit of a mess, and I wish we didn't have to do that. And I've seen other places or other libraries which manage this via basically a build step, and I was like, well, if Blitz had some sort of way to tie into its own build process of things, because we're already doing a rebuild of the site to manage the .blitz folder, it's like, okay, maybe there's a good place for that to fit. And equally the same problem for translations. It's kind of a similar problem because on each page rendering, you have all of these different translations which you use across each locale. Again, we've got our own custom solution for it, but it's like another thing that could be easily tied to as part of a build step. So it'd be nice. And also right now on the live site we're using, I can't even remember which Blitz version we're using, but it'll probably be a version from about 6 months ago, because it started getting a bit tiring when you had a bunch of command line naming changes to keep up with it and to make sure the build process was the same. For now, I just froze the version because it was just a bit annoying at that time. Probably it's not a huge effort to change some build settings and these things, but I start to feel like, okay, I know it's my fault for going production with something in an alpha stage, but at the same time, it'd be nice if, I don't know, more thought around kind of the breaking changes around CLI particularly would be a positive thing. So it starts to feel like it's, for me at least, it works pretty well. Maybe it's not completely production 100% ready of these things, or at least it wasn't 6 months ago perhaps, but yeah, it'd be nicer if things stabilize. Maybe they have, and I've just not looked at it. I've not kept up to date with it that well in the last few months. But yeah, and now just on the last point of it, which is summary. And yeah, for me, Blitz has been amazing because it's basically just let me write what I wanted. It didn't really do anything for me that crazy outside of simplifying what it would have taken for me to write a whole API in an external project, connect it up to, but basically make it a full API. And then in my Next.js project, I'd have had to somehow query this data to get the pages building for static rendering, which would have been the same type of data requests. And it would have just been a mess, either doing API calls, which wouldn't have saved much because I'd be still making HTTP requests. So I'd have ended up with still a slow service, or rewriting or copying across a bunch of code from some other API part. So that's been amazing. The way it just really, really simplified being able to share query level code and page build level code and put it all into a nice way has been amazing. And now we're starting to write the CMS. We're starting to actually use some of the editing capacity, like the mutations. We're starting to actually use the use query, whereas we basically haven't used them at all. And it's just a simplification of something that's kind of annoying to write if you have to do it the first time. So for me, Blitz has been fantastic just because it's quite small-ish in the assumptions and forcing of things it tries to do. Yeah. So yeah, for me, the like kind of general feeling from it, from doing the migration, was the Blitz isn't too hard. You can just obviously you have to swap out the database, you have to swap out these parts, which you're going to do. But the harder part is just really trying to make sure that your data flow and the infrastructure around the data is going to make sense for you. And yeah, so I think that's kind of brings it to a close for me. Actually, it's quite short that way. So we've got some questions. I don't know how to look at what's going on in chat, but yeah. There we go.
Chat. Tim. So everybody should now be able to unmute themselves and share your video.
Great. So Kevin,
if you have a question, just unmute. And
first question, that search is a bit slow. Have you considered Algolia? Hint, hint. Well, I have actually done.
Preface that by saying I am an employee. It's more of a joke, but sure.
But no, I understand what you mean, actually. Well, basically, yes, we did actually consider it. In fact, about a year and a half ago, we even started building some search index onto Algolia. The host has asked me to start my video. Is that a thing I should click?
So we can see you.
Ah, okay. I wasn't too sure if it's some new trick of these guys. I don't know what I want to click on right now. So yeah, like the search is not where I want it to be, and as you can imagine, it depends on what you're actually asking for. Because if you click on certain things on there, because it's a database query, it's going to implicitly make some different joins, and it starts to not be that easy after a while. So obviously, if you just search a casino name, having not touched anything on the page, it's pretty fast. But then obviously, as you start to imply a bunch of joins and a bunch of basically add on to the query, then it becomes slower. But yeah, with Algolia, I looked at it. It's obviously a bit of a pain to build out an index into things, because you have to really understand what type of searching is going to actually happen on the side, what things are going to go. And of course, we kind of understand because we've got limitation on the filters. But building these indexes was basically the kind of first point we hit into. We used it for a bit, but then I think kind of just abandoned it for a while. But it's a good point. I actually should seriously look at Algolia and obviously its competitors and these things. But to be honest, it's a nice reminder that I should really look into using some external self-search indexing provider, even Elasticsearch, but I would rather not do that. That's a bit too much work for me. Elasticsearch could also be a good candidate. The problem with Elasticsearch I always found was it just requires, like, you need to actually be good at Elasticsearch, and I'm not really that good at that part. And whereas a lot of the external providers do tend to at least do the thing I'm not that great at, which is search index parts and like managing all these systems. I try to stick to the thing we're good at. And like we as the group of developers and the company we tend to be pretty good at creating all this data, creating these connections to things and expressing it onto a page and expressing it into a nice way for people to look at, not just view-wise, but understanding what data people want to see in this market. Whereas what we're not so great at, or at least I'm not so great at, is all of these. I'm not that great a programmer. I'm okay at things. I understand things pretty well, but I'm always hesitant to pick up a whole new system like Elasticsearch because it's complex, and more things to learn isn't always better than these things. But yeah. But any other questions around around anything really? But I mean, things I'm best at answering are type of problems that we face and how they might relate to something you're worried about or starting to try yourself. Excellent.
You can unmute and ask a question, or you can also just drop it in the chat. And yeah, Tim, it has stabilized much more since the beta release. So I don't think we've had any. I think we maybe have one breaking change since the beta release, like a month and a half ago, and there'll be a few more minor ones coming, but definitely
yeah. I don't doubt it, Brendan. It's just a case of I think that a breaking change happened in the middle of the time I really didn't want it to happen. I had people in my ears, and I thought, okay, I stick it on this version. I stopped thinking about it. I don't want to be shouted at anymore. It just got stressful, and I thought, okay, I freeze the version. I know it was a risk running this alpha software at the time. I don't know if we've changed that perspective yet, but
yeah, it's beta.
At that point, I just froze. It's in beta now. Excellent. It still says alpha for me because we froze at that point. So, so yeah. So Jeremy, any issues with merge conflicts with multiple devs working on Prisma schema or other parts of the Blitz app? Well, I mean, yes, of course. There's always going to be, for me, merge issues when we're working on this, but on the general website part of things, of course, we get issues with merge conflicts. We've got at the moment 4 developers working on this full-time, and some in different areas of the code base. But of course, we sometimes pick up some larger branches where we hit onto some bigger questions or bigger functionalities. And even when we've done some bigger refactorings, we've had some very scary merges come through. But I think that this is not really definitely not a unique to Blitz problem. And the Prisma schema to be honest, all the merging issues I've had on it get kind of handled pretty well. Like we didn't get anything that was weird. It's not like, gosh, I can't remember it, but there was like 10 years ago, there was some configuration file for Visual Studio that used to always have merge issues and things like this, and it was a nightmare and it never got understood. But it's nothing on that scale. It's pretty logical. So if people start adding some fields in different parts of it, it seems nowadays things get handled pretty elegantly, and if you have a vague understanding of the data, it's not too scary to change or to merge the conflicts.
Where do you host it?
DigitalOcean. We just got one box, 2 boxes, and we've got one of which manages the CI building and that type of stuff, and we've got a few which builds a Docker container, Docker image rather, and then on the other server we just have a couple of images running of a couple of Docker containers running with these images.
Do you know what size? Is it like fairly large?
Yeah, it's going to be decent large. I can't say exactly the size. I've not looked for a while, but
is your database there too?
Yeah. Like I said, the way we actually did the whole infrastructure is one image is containing the database and the server running. So when you click start, it runs its own instance of a database. That's kind of how we're managing that publishing flow. And obviously that's created the separate problem of when you've got the data, which is like this data, which you see on the page, and it's really all about the content and these type of, like, say, for example, the casinos you're searching, which is fairly static according to a build. But the next phase of work we're going to work on is A, the CMS part of it, and B, also a slight separation between the user data as well. So we've got obviously a user login and all this type of stuff. And this data kind of needs to be separated from the main data, because the user data, of course, changes, and you would not want to have 2 separate instances running 2 separate databases. And a user gets created, and of course they go on to the next server or via next image via a change or something happening, and their user won't exist anymore, of course, because it's a separate database. So obviously that data needs to be separated somehow. And this kind of runs into my next problem I'm going to have of, okay, obviously this was meant to be a kind of intermediary solution, having these databases hosted within an image just to handle this workflow. But like I need some way to kind of separate out either way this workflow related data, so this published data and this user data, because the published data people are going to change on a day-to-day basis, but maybe the build itself will not have applied yet. So I'd hate for the situation for someone doing a search and then they find something that appears that shouldn't appear because there's no page for it yet. So I'm trying to work out at the moment a solution for separating kind of this content data and transactional data. Yeah. I haven't got an answer for that. So if there's suggestions, I'm really open.
Anyone else have questions?
I guess I can ask one. I saw on one of your slides you mentioned not deciding to update the seed file after a change. So I'm just wondering how you manage like data when you're developing. If you don't seed the database but you have to clear it, like, do you have a process for refilling it without using the seeds?
Sure. Maybe I blasted through that too quickly, because that's exactly the opposite of what's happening. So at the moment, what we do is pretty much throughout it, like we have the Sanity CMS part is still running, and that's where all of our content editors make the content changes. And on every build, we actually do a Blitz seed. I don't know what it's called now, but Blitz DB seed is what it was. So we do a Blitz DB reset to kind of kick off the building of the database structure, and then the seed to populate all the data based upon a singular import file that the Sanity CMS generates at that time. So every single build, we actually create a whole new instance of the database. So we are very much doing the seeds probably in a way that is really not meant to be. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, probably my fault for not being super clear on something.
You were busy with that.
logger or make any changes to track application monitoring? No, pretty much just everything used out of the box. Like we already kind of had our own. To be honest with you, I didn't know there was a Blitz logger. We have our own logging stuff working at the moment, and it's not many changes to that. But everything still worked for us. We're using basically Google Analytics for all the basic stuff, and New Relic being sent data for otherwise. Does Blitz have a special logger? I didn't know about this. Does it do something cool?
Just the Blitz built-in logger, like which logs like the queries, input, and duration
yeah.
and so forth. And you can customize the level of that, so you can make it more verbose or less verbose. And I think we'll probably add a logger export at some point here, like a universal logger that you can just import and use client side, server side, and then be able to plug in like log drains too. So
exactly, that would be super cool. Because yeah, I mean, at the moment, which basically all my queries previously had to have some logging written by before, so we could understand exactly how slow things were and what was going on. So I just maintained using that. But if there exists some way just to suck up a log drain, send through, then that would be great. Yeah.
cool. Any more questions? Now's your chance. Okay. Thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, no worries at all.
I really appreciate it.
If anyone has questions that they
And
think about later or something like this, give me a shout, I guess, on Discord. I don't check it super often, mainly because I'm not too familiar with it yet, but I'll try and be better with it. And feel free to ask a question if you've got some issues with things, because we've had a lot of issues which I've almost forgotten to talk about at this point, because not necessarily with Blitz, but with having like these medium large size applications coming out, particularly around the static rendering, particularly around the building and all these things. I really know how hard it is, actually, because it seems pretty easy to have a static built site, but actually the more you do it, the more problems just seem to keep coming without stop. So feel free to ask me questions on Discord and I'll try and get back to you, no problem at all.
cool. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm very, very sorry about the rude interruptions. I'll do my best to make sure that I get all the settings locked down for next time, and probably like turn on the waiting room so I have more control over that, and hopefully won't have any more issues. And not putting Zoom in the tweet, the public tweet, just Meetup link, which is. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you, everyone.